authors joining us today. My name is Patrick. I'm with the organization who's pulled this together, BroadArt. And just a couple of really quick housekeeping features in case you've never participated in one of the Tell Me More sessions that we offer. This is set up slightly differently than a traditional Zoom environment. This is a Zoom webinar. So if you notice you don't see all the other participants' screens, your camera's not showing, you will not be able to speak as part of the webinar to ask questions, but we encourage questions. So what you'll see at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A panel. You can enter your questions into that area. I will be trying to field those throughout the webinar. And if you have a specific question for an author, please type that in when you have it. If it's a general question, we might save that toward the end. The webinar will hopefully wrap up. We'll try and target it for around 45 minutes. You are welcome to, if you have to leave, no problem. You don't disrupt the webinar in any way. And with all of that said, we're going to get things started, and I'm going to pass things over to Susie Hawley, who is actually a collection development specialist for BroadArt, and she will be hosting and moderating today's session. So thank you so much for joining us, Susie.
Hi, everyone. We're so happy that you came to our webinar. We have, as Patrick said, 4 wonderful authors with their really terrific books today. We start with Lee Ashkenas, who has written Arletta's, Abuela, and The Message in the Bottle. It's illustrated by husband and wife team Cornelius Van Wright and Yingzhua Hu. It was published by Starbright, and in fact, it hit the shelves on April 25th, so it's very new. This is her first children's book, although not her first book. And as the publisher said, it's a lushly illustrated portrait of life in rural Cuba that will enchant children, and I agree wholeheartedly. Please go ahead, Lee. Tell us all about it.
Okay, well, first, thank you so much for including me in this panel. I am really excited to be here to share some of the backstory of my book and then to get to hear about everybody else's book. So as Susie said, Arletta's Abuelo and The Message in a Bottle is it's my debut picture book. It is based on the true story of Arletta's, who on her 8th birthday found a message in a bottle on the beach near her home in rural Cuba. And she then became pen pals with the man who wrote the message, an older man, a sailor named Steve from California, who lives on a tiny tugboat in the bay. So the connection between Arletta's and Steve is really special on many levels. There are so many differences between them. Their genders, their ages, their ethnicities, their cultures, their native languages. Although something really, really special, coincidental, was that Steve was studying Spanish at the time that Arletta's found his message in a bottle. So they were able to be pen pals in Spanish. But I feel like their connection is really special because of all the differences. And on top of it, it's the US and it's Cuba. And the US has a very long-standing embargo against Cuba, which makes it so it's very difficult for US citizens to travel to Cuba. But Steve manages to do that several times, actually, and goes to Cuba and meets Arletta's and her family. So these two strangers become pen pals, they become friends, and after this visit, they become like family. So hence the word abuelo, or grandfather, in the title, because Steve becomes like the grandfather that Arletta's never had. So what I want to do is share a little of the backstory of my book. And although this is a very short book, it's a picture book, because it's based on a true story, it has a pretty big backstory. So I am a librarian when I'm not writing, and when I'm not teaching poetry. I have 2 jobs. And my book started in a library. It started in the Sausalito Public Library in California, where I was working at the time. And all of my coworkers knew that I was a writer. My first book, which is an adult book, a travel memoir called Escuba, Life and Love on an Illegal Island. And it's about a year I spent living in Cuba. That had just come out. So all my coworkers knew I was a writer. They knew I had this connection with Cuba. And one day my supervisor said to me, Lee, there is this man who comes into the library regularly, and I really think that you should meet him because he has been to Cuba and he has his own Cuba story, and maybe you even want to write something about it. So I had her introduce me to Steve, and when I heard his message in a bottle story, I thought, yeah, I definitely want to write about this. At the time, I was just thinking of an article. So I set up a couple interviews with Steve. I went to this tiny tugboat where he had lived at that point. He was in his 50s. He'd lived on it for almost 3 decades. He lived on it and worked out of it as a tugboat operator, lived this very simple life. And I interviewed him there, and I learned all about his story, his connection with Arletis and her family. And I wrote my article, and it was published in a travel magazine. But during the process of interviewing him and writing the article, I began to feel like the article was complete, and it felt complete, but I began to feel like, I think this is a bigger story, and I feel like it's a children's book, a children's picture book. When I interviewed Steve, he shared with me all the letters that he and Arletis had written each other, and he shared with me photos of his visit to Cuba. And I got to see the street where Arletis lived, which she had never left before her 8th birthday, when her parents took her and her little sister to a beach house for the weekend. And I saw these photos of her street, which was just beautiful and lush and jungly. And I saw photos of the kids playing baseball and dancing in the street and swimming in the river behind their house. And I could just see it as an illustrated book. So, like Steve, I went to Cuba. I flew into Havana. I caught a bus 2 hours west to Pinar del Rio to meet Arletis and her family, and I spent about 4 or 5 days with them. And then I came back, and at the time I was getting my master's degree in library science, and I was so excited to be writing this book, to be working on a new genre, to be sharing this story, that I took a semester off from library school in order to study up on children's picture books and to write this. I wrote it, and I had a very, very difficult time getting it published. I got so many rejections from agents, from editors at publishing houses. And my first book had taken 3 years to get a publisher interested. And I thought that was a long time. So sometimes it seemed like every rejection was a different reason. I had one editor who said, oh, it's too long. I had one editor who said it's too sophisticated. And I teach poetry writing to kids. I'm in the classroom all the time, and I had actually shared the manuscript with kids, and I knew it wasn't too sophisticated. I knew they could get this story of a message in a bottle and a connection between cultures and generations. I had one editor who said it was too short. It should be a middle grade chapter book, but I knew it was a picture book. I had another editor who said it needed to be in Arletis's voice. It's written in the third person because I feel like it's like a fairy tale, and it begins, once on an alligator-shaped island, there was a little girl named Arletis. And I felt very strongly that that was how the story should be told. And the last rejection I can remember was from a publisher who said, we love it, we definitely want it, we just want one change. And that change was that Abuelo Esteban, grandfather Steve, needed to become Abuela, I don't know, Estebania. He had to become a woman, they said. And the connection with Arlettes, it couldn't be directly with her. It had to be with the classroom. And they felt it was that an older man should not befriend a younger girl. And really, this is a connection he made with her family and her. And I thought, no, this is a real story, and this is how it happened. So I persisted and I persisted. And finally, after 12 years, I got my publisher, Starbright Books, and I am so pleased with the job they've done with the book. In addition to the story itself, there's a lot of great back matter. They let me do an author's note, which tells some of the backstory I just shared with you. We also have a list of recommended reading and viewing for kids who want to learn more about life in contemporary Cuba. There is a recipe of Arlettes's favorite dessert, cascos de toronja. And there's one more thing, and we have a glossary for the words, the Spanish words that are sprinkled throughout the book. Also, I'm really thrilled because the book is published in Spanish, which means that this story of cross-cultural connection can be read by so many more people, including one of the main characters of the book. So I'm just going to conclude, because it is a real story, by showing you just a few photos of some of the real characters. And this will mean more once you've seen the illustrations, but I'm just going to share, I think I have 4 photos. So this first photo is, got to go to share. Okay, the first photo is of Arlettes when Steve first met her, when at this point she was 10 years old. They'd been communicating for about 2 years, writing letters. And this is her with the bottle and with a doll that he had brought down for her. And then I would like to share this other photo, which is Steve and Arlettes together. And again, the bottle and the doll. And then remember, it took 12 years for this book to sell. So to celebrate, I was very ready to celebrate at that point. I invited Steve and we went back to Cuba together to see Arlettes and her family. At this point, she is an adult and she had 2 little children. So this is her with her youngest child, her daughter, Analia, and the bottle, which to this day she still has. And this is Steve. And the last photo I'm going to show, I want to thank my publisher because, well, due to the pandemic and other reasons, after these 12 years of waiting to get a publisher, it took 4 years, exactly 4 years for the book to be published, for it to be illustrated, translated, produced. So my publisher agreed to get me advance copies months before it was published. And in February, I was able to take those advance copies down to Cuba and present the book at their international book festival. And Arlettes and her children traveled 2 hours from their town to be there for the event. And so this last photo is her today with her son, with the book, her son Christopher, who is now 8, the same age that Arlettes was when she found the bottle, and her daughter Analia, who is 5, the same age that Arlettes' little sister was when Arlettes found the bottle. So I'm going to stop there.
By viewers, they were not able to see those images. So although we were seeing them on our side, for some reason they were not carrying over into the webinar. So I do apologize to the viewers that they were missing out on that. They are included in the book as well. So as somebody just pointed out, but I do apologize. We were unaware that that was going to happen. So thanks for trying to share those, Lee, but I apologize. It didn't work out.
All right. Well, everyone will have to look at the book then.
There you go.
They're on my website as well.
Thank you so much, Lee. And the book is really quite wonderful. And you answered all the questions I had by even telling us about the wonderful dessert. And there is one other thing you didn't mention, but there's a great map in this that shows where the bottle starts and where it ends. And I really enjoyed that. Thank you again. Ty, you're up now. And we know that you are a poet, a puppeteer, and a playwright. And you have written an interesting book called Looking for Happy, a very intriguing title. It's illustrated by Keenan Farrell, and it was published actually yesterday. Very exciting. It's published by Beaming Books. And you are currently a candidate in creative writing for children and young adults at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. You're passionate about art, and you speak to the Black experience in America. So please tell us about your wonderful book, Looking for Happy.
Hello, I am Ty and guilty of all accusations there. Dear playwright, all the fun things. I am the author of Sarah Rising, was my first book. Also, I helped write A Door Made for Me with Tyler Merritt. It was a very lovely project, but I'm not here to talk about those books. I'm here to talk about Looking for Happy. So, this book follows a young boy who is having a rough day, but importantly, is having a rough day with no real explanation as to why. And I think that's a feeling that a lot of us adults can relate to. Sometimes we just have gloomy downer days and we can't quite put a finger on what's going on. And I think we forget sometimes that those are very real feelings that children have as well. I wanted to write this book because I was a fairly unhappy kid, and that wasn't because I had some horrible upbringing or I didn't have the support I needed. I very much did. I grew up in a very loving household. I just had a lot of big feelings, and there weren't a lot of books. There weren't a lot of books for young boys about big feelings. There weren't a lot of books for young Black boys about big feelings, and so writing this book, I feel like this is the most cliche thing I could possibly say in this webinar, but writing this book in a big way was writing the books I wish I had as a kid. I think that's something that gets thrown around a lot, but in this case, I would say it's very genuinely true. Throughout the book, the main character sort of goes in search of happiness. He tries all the normal things. He plays video games. He tries playing tag with his friends. He watches cartoons with his sister, and he cannot shake this gloomy mood. His grandmother, who he lives with, gets involved, and sort of to appease her, to keep her from worrying, this child agrees to go to the park with his grandmother as a means of potentially cheering him up, and that doesn't work either. And then, kind of on a chance event on the way back home, he hears music. He hears the sound of a street performer at his local park. And he runs away from his grandma, which I don't advocate that young children do, but that is what he did. And he runs to the source of this music and meets this man playing a saxophone in the park. Grandma encourages the saxophone player to play a very specific song, and that is sort of the turning point for the child. And so it's really just emphasizing the idea that it is very normal to have off days. And sometimes the best thing we can do is hold on and remember that that's a human experience, and trust that happier days and events are around the corner. Yeah, I think I said a lot of what I wanted to speak to. I think one question I get from folks a lot is why I chose to have him live with a grandmother as opposed to mom and dad. And a big part of that for me is wanting to depict families in different ways. Again, writing that book I wish I had as a little kid. I grew up in a single parent household, and there were a lot of picture books that featured two parents. And for me as a young child, still trying to process what that even meant and what, all these, again, big feelings. It was kind of a bummer to not have different family compositions present in the media I was consuming. So that's something I try to be intentional about in all my books. Sarah Rising, a little girl and her dad go to a protest. In this book, a little boy finds happiness with his grandmother. Yeah. I'd be excited about any questions. I can't hear you, Susan.
I know because I was still muted.
Okay.
I was starting to talk. I was very excited about that. I loved it that the grandmother was in that book because, you know, so many kids are being raised by their grandparents now. And so that was very important. But not only that, I loved it that the grandmother was dancing with her grandson. She was just as full of happiness in life as he was. And not only that, I could hear that saxophonist playing. I love the saxophone. So that caught me right immediately. So we appreciate this, and I understand you have lots more books coming.
Yeah, I've been trying to stay busy. Thank you for the kind words, first and foremost. Yeah, it's fun watching grandma dance on the pages. That was like the coolest thing to get back from the illustrator. But yeah, I'm up to a lot of things. I'm in grad school to try to figure out novel length work. My wheelhouse is poetry and picture books. I do have a poetry collection coming out next year for adults. As well as a few more picture books in various stages of production. So trying to stay very busy. One that I can talk about, I'm collaborating with my dear friend John Coy on a picture book about a historic basketball player who no one really knows about. Like even like the big basketball heads that I meet don't know this player. And it's a shame. So we wrote a book about that.
And that actually ties directly to one of the questions that came in from one of the viewers. Melanie was asking, have you considered nonfiction material for the same reasons? So you've got the basketball jersey behind you. So we obviously have a connection on that. So you are drifting into will that be a nonfiction book or a fictionalized version of that historic basketball player?
There's a light amount of dramatization just for the sake of young reader investment, but it's all based on real events. It's very much a nonfiction title. Yeah, nonfiction is something that I'm continuing to tinker with. I've done some work for hire books about Mars. I'm writing one, actually, I can't say what that's about, but I'm writing another little work for hire nonfiction project too. It's something I'm getting a feel for, and I think I could see a reality in which I write nonfiction materials for young folks about mental health, because that is something that I really think is quite important, especially in the days that we're living in currently. There's a lot to feel stress about.
Good, Ty. That was so interesting. And now, Mike, we're turning it over to you. And Mike Petrick is an author and illustrator. He's written a graphic children's early reader book. It's called King of Cool, and it's the first one in a series called One Cool Duck. Doesn't that really sound great? He was always interested in art, and he was good at it. I think he did a lot of drawing with his brother. When he became, after he graduated from college, he became an art director for a company. And I really wondered today when he was saying that he has another day job, because I know that he felt that those hours were so unforgiving and he was raising a young family. So he turned to a lot of this new graphic art children's work that he's doing. And I hope afterwards he'll tell us a little bit about how he got into that. If you want to read about some more about him and see a wonderful picture of his family, go to The Art and Life with Mike Petrick. And he also has a website that has wonderful doodles on it and activities, and it's mike.petrick.com. And so now, Mike, it's up to you to talk about this terrific book.
Thank you. Thank you first for having me here. This is quite an honor. This is my first series, as Susie mentioned. Previously to this, I am an author and illustrator of a picture book called Sammy's Spooktacular Halloween, and I actually did 2 board books for the very young audience called Silly Sounds of Halloween and Silly Sounds of Christmas. So obviously there's a holiday theme in those books. But this one came about as a series. It started as a picture book idea, and what I wanted to do was see if we could expand it. And it was just kind of, hey, do you think if we pitch this as a series? And writing a series, it turns out, is very different from writing just a one-off sort of picture book story, because each story has to have, the full arc of a story, obviously, but you have to be able to continue the adventures in the next stories. So right now there's 4. First one comes out next week, The King of Cool, but then there's 3 more coming out. So I had to kind of figure out this puzzle, how to make that work with, wrapping up a story within 1 book and then kind of continuing 3 other books. So let me go back a little bit. What I really wanted to do was include things that from my youth that I still, because I think that's what a lot of this is, when I was reading these books to, like, when I, first started having kids, I would read these picture books and it would make me feel like a kid. I remember them, and, it made you just feel like that excitement that you don't feel in everyday life. And I wanted that in my books. So this, I wanted to have kind of adventure stories for kids to, when they're reading, when they're reading these books, they feel excited, they feel that sense of, how big the world is, and going out and exploring and discovering new things. And in this, these One Cool Duck is very much just a friendship book. So it's from my youth, my brother and I and the neighborhood kids, we'd ride around on our skateboards. I'm very much a child of the 80s and 90s, where we spent a lot of time out on the skateboards and going to the arcade and, getting into, we actually built, you can even see on the cover, we built a rope swing like this over a creek one summer. And I love that stuff. I love the sort of going out and discovering and having an adventure. And that's what I wanted to give to other kids, because nowadays, and I see it in my kids, so much of their socializing is on screens. And once we shove them out the door, we say turn the screens out, go outside, there's a switch that happens, and they're using their creativity, and they're having fun. And that's what I want to kind of encourage in other kids and other readers. And so, like I was saying, this we start off with one adventure, and what I discovered was that when doing these series books, it's more character driven than it is the story. So much of the actual movement of the story depends on the relationships of these characters, and that's where the friendship really developed. There's a lot of the archetypes of the kind of the jock and the smart kid, and the kind of really cool kid, and there's all those sort of characters. But I really had to develop and think about how each one of these characters, and kind of give them their own sort of shining moments in the stories. So Duck is there almost as, I always compared him to Fonzie. So he's cool, but he's he's still like a genuine, has a good heart. So in this first book, we are introduced to Cat, who is also cool, but he's not nice. And so the other kids, I call them kids, it's an alligator and a dog and a pig and a turkey. The other kids figure out, well, he's cool, but he's kind of not very nice. And then, Duck sort of, you get that. You don't want to like spoon feed these sort of sweet lessons to kids, because they can smell it a mile away, but that it's still in there, that how important kindness and friendship is to maintaining these relationships. And then that will help to carry out through the rest of the series. So is there any questions?
I have to get that mute off before I can ask a question.
Okay.
But I can't really figure out how to get my mouse over there is the problem. Anyway, I wish that you would tell a little bit about what you did when you decided you really wanted to start writing children's books. You reached out to a former mother, a former woman whom you babysat for.
Yes, that is kind of a wild story going back. So this is I don't know, probably not 10 years, probably 8 years ago at this point. I used to babysit for Candace Fleming's children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I even remember, this is, early 90s. I remember her saying, like, I'm going to be an author one day. And, she'd be writing her picture books. But I was 12. I didn't give it any thought. And then fast forward to, when I'm an adult and I'm interested in exploring this, I just out of the blue sent her an email saying, I don't know if you remember me. I used to babysit for your two boys. And, I'm just, I'm interested. I'm new to this. And she was like, oh, Mike, of course, come on over. You live not too far away. She actually, her partner, Eric Roman, is the illustrator for many of her books. And they have an illustrators group in the Chicago area. So they invited me. They were just like, of course, come on over, come see what it's all about. And they basically gave me like a 4-year portfolio review in 2 sort of, meetup groups. I brought my portfolio and they gave me the full, like, this is not good. This is very good. Expand on this. You're missing this. And it was like, Tom Lichtenheld and Matthew Cordell and Stacy Curtis and Larry Day and all these, heavy hitters. And so I was pretty lucky to kind of just stumble into that one. And I thank Candy forever and ever for giving me that invite over to her house to do that, because it changed everything. So once they were like, yeah, this looks great, send this out, then I sent it out, and then that's where I picked up an agent and took off from there and got my first deal.
What did you call the group, or what's the name of the group?
Oh, they call themselves the Crusty Nibs.
Thanks, Mike. That's great.
We
Okay,
also have
Susan.
2 questions.
Oh,
related.
okay.
We have 2
Great.
questions. They're related questions coming in from viewers. So I'll kind of combine them. So one is because you specifically mentioned this in writing your first foray into writing a series. You
Mhm.
said that each book still has its own arc. So one of the questions is, does the series have its own arc that you tried to follow? And related to that, one of the questions was, do you need to read the books in order, or does each book stand alone once the book is all released?
Well, that's a good question too, because well, here, let me kind of answer that first one. So that's the idea, is that there's not one big arc over the whole series. You just want to be able to continue. So think about it like, like a television series. Like, you kind of don't want it to end. And that's, the way that they plan it. You don't want it to, how many seasons of, Friends was there? They would have kept it going forever if they could. So you want to be able to kind of keep the structure. But each one of those episodes has its own story arc. But there is going to be some, there is some changes along the way. I'm, hopefully changing seasons. Like I said, I only have the 4 for now. And if they do well, I would love to do more. And of course, that would bring about more opportunities for developing further stories. But to answer the second part, you really do not have to read them in order. And that was a kind of a struggle because, the target audience for this is younger. It's not, the language in it is not as developed as, some of the more popular, like the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, for example, because there's, those are for kids who are comfortable reading, lots of text and big words. And this is for kind of the kids who want to read those cool comics, but they just can't yet, or they're not comfortable yet. So it's more visual driven. So you want to be able to give, if they pick up book number 3, they can read it and not feel like they missed anything. And so that's how I'm setting them all up, is that you don't really have to read them in any sort of order, but they do relate. There's cliffhangers from one book to the next. But if you pick up book 2 without reading book 1, you don't feel like you missed any big part of the story. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Susan, it's your turn.
Okay.
And Susan Goldman Rubin wrote a remarkable book called Women Who Built Hollywood. And it's about 12 trailblazers in front and behind the cameras. She was born in the Bronx, and she and her mother used to go to the movies frequently. So she always loved them. And it's interesting how this opportunity arose for her. Anyway, she had always dreamed of being an artist, and she started out her professional career writing and illustrating children's books. But eventually she turned to nonfiction, mostly in art and history, and most of them are for the older children. She's written over 55 books, and they are all meticulously researched. And you're going to love hearing about how it came about that she wrote this particular title.
Thank you, Susie. Oh, thank you so much. It's a lovely introduction.
Thanks.
I actually went to the movies with both my parents,
Oh,
and those were double features. And in those days, we didn't go at the beginning of a movie. We just went when we were done with dinner. And that helped me become a writer. My dad would always say, now, Susie, I was called Susie, remember where we came in. And you had to reconstruct the story, given what you had seen of movie one, then go through movie two. It was a lot, and it was wonderful. I loved movies, and it was always my idea to do a book about the early silent film stars like Mary Pickford, who were my size. I'm 5 feet tall. I used to be 5'1.5", but I have to admit it, I'm 5 feet. And I had much curlier hair. And just 3 years ago, almost exactly, it was the pandemic. The pandemic started right after my birthday, which was March. And I thought, I just want to keep writing. And I called my editor and pitched an idea I had always had called Girls with Curls, Stars of the Silent Screen, thinking, oh, she's not going to like this, but it's worth a try. And she loved it. And she said, wait a minute, let's expand that idea and make it an anthology. Why not talk about other women who were behind the camera, and of course, other actresses besides Mary Pickford? I was thinking of Mary Pickford. An important part of it was that Mary Pickford was a successful superstar businesswoman and turned out to be, starting from being a very hard scrabble life, one of the richest women, most powerful women in Hollywood. And I didn't know any of this when I started. So she said, yeah, let's go for it. So that was wonderful. Of course, it was pandemic, and all the research had to be done either with books I already had at home or books that I could find online. We wanted to include women who were of different colors and ethnicities. So right away, Hattie McDaniel, Gone with the Wind. And then in reading about Hattie McDaniel and Gone with the Wind, I already had books on hand because I had done a biography of Paul Robeson, who was a great athlete, activist, and actor. And I had many, many books about the history of Black film by Black film historians. And there was a lot of controversy to this day about Gone with the Wind. And I thought, great, we're going to include that in this book. But along the way, I discovered actresses I didn't even know about, like Louise Beavers, who it turned out was one of the first and best known Black actresses, starred in 200 movies. She and Hattie McDaniel were friends and friendly competitors for the same roles. She wanted to be Mammy in Gone with the Wind. Hattie got it. Hattie wanted to play her part, Delilah, in a movie called Imitation of Life, which I really watched. It's terrific. I couldn't get over how good these films were. You know, you can watch a lot of them online through YouTube and streamers. And they both, to make it even better, they were both activists here in Los Angeles. So I thought, oh, thank you, God. You know, this is always something, civil rights, that's something I always want to bring into my books. So there were many other choices. I was amazed to discover that the first Chinese American woman was Marian Wong, who not only made the first Chinese American film, but founded her own company in Oakland. And I thought, oh my goodness. And my son is a theater publicist. And I said, did you know about this? He said, oh, everybody knows about Marian Wong. I said, I don't think so. So I was very excited to write about this woman who made a film. And there was another book I used as a reference called Hollywood Chinese. It again brought up very important issues such as anti-Chinese racism, as well as all kinds of racism. There were so many obstacles that these women had to face. But a lucky thing for me was that I was able to track down Marian Wong's great nephew, Gregory Yi Mark. And he's a scholar and teaches at one of the universities. And he said, Marian Wong was my great aunt. And he said, my grandmother starred in the movie. So over the phone, I could do what in nonfiction we call primary research, which means actually talking to someone. You know, who was I going to talk to? And here was Gregory Yi Mark, whose grandmother starred in the movie. And he told me the whole story of how she turned over these dusty old reels to him and said, oh, Gregory, do something with these movies. And he watched them. He was fascinated. And now they're part of the National Library Film Registry. I always have to check my own books for exact names and places. So it was marvelous to kind of discover who I would write about. An interesting early director is named Dorothy Arzner. And she directed films. She could pick and choose. Her dad had a restaurant, and filmmakers such as Charlie Chaplin used to come in to her dad's restaurant. So she began to know a bit about filmmaking. And she directed films about women's issues, introduced some newcomers called Lucille Ball and Maureen O'Hara. Of course, young readers today might not be as familiar with these names, but I certainly was. And it turns out that these films about women's issues have become very popular today and are still considered very important. So it was fabulous to discover who my 12 would be. One of them was a stunt woman and screenwriter named Helen Holmes, and she starred in a movie that she wrote, a serial called The Hazards of Helen. And unlike The Perils of Pauline, she always won the day. She was tough. And it was marvelous to read about the stunts she did and to find out that women became replaced by men doing stunts. One of the points of the book was that in the early days of filmmaking, women had great power because movie making wasn't taken seriously as a money-making business. And then gradually, of course, movies became very successful and men began to take over. And I had to bring my book full circle up to the present because women today are really struggling to get their foothold back into filmmaking. And very luckily for me, a good friend and assistant of mine knew the costume designer, Ruth Carter, who won an Oscar for her costumes for Black Panther. And she graciously agreed to write the foreword to our book and enjoyed reading the book and bringing my story full circle up to the present. So I loved doing the book, and I just hoped that readers would come away wanting to see clips or all of these movies and really be amazed and inspired that women can do anything. I'm a mother and grandmother and great-grandmother, so I'm not a feminist who marches, but I believe so much in the power of women to pursue their arts. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Susan. And one thing you might want to say is that you now have one of your 12 on a quarter that was just minted.
Thank you for pointing that out. Luck was with me all the way. I wrote about Anna May Wong, who was the first Chinese American film star, and she was gorgeous. And she struggled enormously, as Paul Robeson had to, as Hattie McDaniel did, against being put down into very unimportant roles and racist roles, and not the major kind of roles that she really wanted. But as luck would have it, the U.S. recently decided to feature women on quarters. And one of the women they chose was Anna May Wong. And just as this book was about to go to the printer, the quarter was released. And we were able to include an image of it in what we call the back matter. And so I said to my publisher, oh, if we ever have conferences again and do book events, can we just hand out a lot of quarters? And she said, no, absolutely no, that's out. But please look for my Anna May Wong quarter. Thanks for reminding me. Thank you.
I also have a couple of questions that came in from the viewers. One is a very well-researched question. The film Sayonara, starring Marlon Brando, Miko Taka, Red Buttons, and Miyoshi Yumiki is recommended highly. Have you considered pursuing other underrepresented groups and individuals from the 50s and 40s?
Oh, golly, I love this person. I love it. Please put me in touch with whoever asked that question. I would adore it. I hope that my editors will be listening to this webinar. Sure, I would love to do that because I remember those movies of the 50s and 40s. Are you kidding? I mean, I am what I am. You see my hair. And I think that's a wonderful idea. That's a wonderful idea. Thanks so much.
So if this viewer would like to reach out to us following the webinar, we can make the connection to get you in touch with Susan. Related question, because you did specifically mention Anna May Wong, the question comes in if you are familiar with and what your opinion is on the representation of Anna May Wong in the Hollywood series on Netflix right now.
The Hollywood series on Netflix.
Yes.
All of the movies that she was in featured her, except for one or two, in minor roles. And she was not happy with those roles. She was in a movie called Toll of the Sea. I'm a member of the Academy, and I haven't yet looked at that new lineup of movies. But the movie she really wanted to be in was the Pearl Buck story. And unfortunately, they overlooked her. They chose a white actress. All this yellow face stuff was coming along where a woman of color, such as Anna May Wong, could not be on film with a white lover. And that just killed me. You know, all those racist obstacles that she had to face and couldn't always overcome. So I will look into that series, but I do know that she wasn't happy with so many of those roles she played, except for Toll of the Sea, which, by the way, was one of the first Technicolor movies. And it was based on the opera Madame Butterfly, which I love. And one of my screenwriters who I wrote about, Frances Marion, who was the giant screenwriter, her success lasted for years. And she wrote the first book on screenwriting. She wrote the screenplay. So there were many interconnections I discovered, you know, in choosing my 12. But thanks for reminding me, and I will take a look. But please look at, read about Anna May Wong. I referred to some excellent biographies that were written for adults and some of her own memoirs that were not published to understand her point of view about these roles. And she just had to take them in order to be an actress. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Any wrap up, Susie?
I think that it's time for us to wrap up. I'm so impressed with what all of you have done. I think that there are messages, important messages in each one of your books. And they're not didactic. The kids aren't going to be hit over the head with them, but they're there and they're excellent. And we thank you very much for what you've provided.
Absolutely. And I do a quick thank you to the all of the publishers of each of the individual authors for helping support this program and bringing these voices to you as we wrap things up. So thank you again to all the authors. Thank you so much to Susie for moderating the discussion. And thank you all to the viewers who participated today.